Welcome to the first Second Take episode of 2025, and I feel good to be back. As you can see, I have a desk now, which means I am serious about being unserious. My name is Ashwyn Mberi. Let's get into the show. All right, let's get into our stories. South Africa has some issues with Rwanda. See, they accused Rwanda-backed M23 rebels of killing its peacekeepers in the Democratic Republic of Congo, escalating tensions between the two nations. South Africa warned that further attacks would be considered a declaration of war, prompting a sharp rebuttal from Rwandan President Paul Kagame. And here he is in his own words.
And South Africa dares even issue threats about what is likely to happen after that and so on and so forth. Of course, we will see what threats they are talking about. Maybe they should have done that exactly for which they have been issuing threats. They should have done it to clean up the mess in Eastern Congo.
All right, let's just calm down. Okay, let's just breathe. Okay, because we don't need war. Especially because none of it will be happening in your own countries. But really, we don't need war as Africa. But one thing I can see is Paul Kagame, unlike the rest of us SADC residents, does not buy Cyril's smile. You see, when we see Cyril smiling, we forget about a lot of things, like Marikana, like Pala Pala. But when Paul Kagame sees Cyril smile, he goes, this guy does not like me and I don't like him back. And to be fair, in his own country, he doesn't really allow people to have their own voices, especially when they oppose him. Let's look at Diane Rikwagra, for example, this Rigara rather. She was arrested for, running against him, and her arrest disqualified her from running for the election. And so, if someone's like that at home, I don't think when they leave the house, they're going to be, more free, relaxed about what other people think. So he is a very tense dude, Paul Kagame, and you have to be tense if you've been a dictator for that long. Cough, cough. But he just is. And at the same time, President Cyril Ramaphosa is going to be meeting with SADC, the SADC Trico meeting. In fact, they actually had the meeting already. What you're seeing there on the screen, on one side is SADC, on the other side is the SADC villas, which were built specifically for the summit, which is why I'm happy, because it looks like the villas are actually going to be used for more than 1 week. But SADC summit, we'll be talking about the results of that a little later, and we hope that these guys can just bring it back. Just relax, because we don't need any more conflict in Africa right now. All right, we now swing into Cyril's home, South Africa, talking about one of his not so favorite families, the Zuma. See, Duduzile Zuma Sambutla, daughter of former South African President Jacob Zuma, faces terrorism charges for allegedly inciting the 2021 riots that killed over 300 people. She denies the charges, claiming no evidence links her to the violence. The case, involving social media posts, is unprecedented and highlights the intersection of politics, law, and digital activism in South Africa. I mean, come on. Listen, we all know by now that if you tweet something, it's gonna be something. I'm not saying that she necessarily broke any laws, but to pretend that you didn't, nudge people the right direction using those characters in your tweets, I don't know if I'm buying that so much. And I have to say, I'm a little biased, because her father's legacy is chaos. And it just feels like, just looking at her smile, it feels like she's comfortable in this space. So, I'm not really worried about her. I'm more worried about justice, and certainly worried about something like this never happening in South Africa again. But the last time South Africans said something would never happen again, it happened. And its name was Jacob Zuma and the MK Party. Now, in the last of our stories, Zimbabwe Vice President Constantine Chiwenga has criticized calls to extend President Emerson Mnangagwa's tenure beyond 2028, while some ZANU-PF members push for constitutional amendments to remove term limits. War veterans and analysts question the credibility of such moves, highlighting internal divisions and the fragility of Zimbabwe's democracy. I think we're way past fragile. I think you can say it with me, broken. It is broken. Because just the idea that you're even having a conversation that involves changing the constitution is crazy, unless you did it before with Robert Mugabe. It's very interesting to see how these guys, do their thing. Monica Kalondo, former First Lady of Namibia, once said that politicians don't have permanent friends, they have permanent interests. And these are folks who are part and parcel of everything that Zimbabwe became. And this bickering doesn't feel like it has anything to do with the people. I think it might have something to do with the coup, non-coup that Chiwenga did for Mnangagwa, or allegedly did or did not do for Mnangagwa, and what he was expecting from that, which was to become the next president, much like Mnangagwa himself expected to become the next president after Robert Gabriel Mugabe. But what happened? Robert Mugabe wanted to give the power to Grace Mugabe, and then, things got shaky. Next thing you know, Zimbabweans are in the streets, Chiwenga is moving around, China coming back, and Mnangagwa is instated. So, of course, there was a price for that. And the price for that is always being scared that the army is going to try and take over, the army that gave you the power. So it's sketchy at best. However, when it comes to the Constitution, it is hard not to agree with anyone who does not want to change it. Because as far as Zimbabwe goes, the Constitution has little of it that is respected. That little bit, rather. That might be all we have. So while everyone is trying to figure out their life after Donald Trump withdrew aid, Anne Hambuda brought us our TikTok of the week, and her opinion was scathing but needed.
All these African people who are complaining about Trump cutting aid to their programs, are you being for real? Yeah, I know that these programs were super important and had amazing effects on all of our countries. But it's not Trump's fault and not Trump's responsibility either. If our countries have not been able to reach a level of self-sufficiency by now, then it's our government's fault. We need to look to our governments and say, why are we not at the level where we can easily detach ourselves from America? Why are we still trying to beg the West for things? You guys are embarrassing the rest of us. Don't be on the internet oh my gosh, this is all going to have devastating effects. How could Trump do this? No, not how could Trump do this. Why isn't your government?
Now, I don't know if you know this, but my second name is Taurai, which means speak. And as much as I can enjoy my own voice, and maybe you do too, it's always good to get a second opinion. So I'll be talking to our ghetto Greg about everything happening globally and in Africa. Well, not everything, just the things that need a second take. It's time to dissect what's happening in the world, and what better way to do it on our first episode for the year than with the one and only Alghetto Greg. How are you doing, Alghetto?
Very good, Ashwyn. Thank you very much.
Yes, I would have asked how your holiday was, but because you're a journalist and I was reading the paper, I assume there was
Not much
holiday. Not much there. Sizable shifts. Globally, politically, economically, and we can pin it down to the day that Donald Trump got into office and started signing. Listen, the man started signing. Now, as you know, my agenda, and I believe yours too, is Africa.
Yes.
And the signing was fun to watch. Yes. Until you saw certain words you don't want to see, like aid, like WHO, and then you're reminded, ooh, okay.
Paris Agreement.
Yes. So let's talk about it. U.S. has decided to withhold aid,
Pause.
temporarily, to 90 days, temporarily pause aid. Various programs are going to be affected. We're talking PEPFAR, we're talking USAID, and they also, World Health Organization, they were very clear about, hey, listen, next 90 days, we're just going to figure out what we want to do with ourselves.
Yes.
But what does this mean for Africa right now?
I think for Africa, it's quite a blow. Many countries have a lot of, especially social interventions, which are funded by American money. And lots of African governments have downgraded the importance of many of these interventions because of foreign aid. So even with the pause currently, while the Americans decide where they're going to continue and where they're not going to continue, it has had a ripple effect throughout the continent in terms of non-governmental organizations and in terms of foreign aid specifically aimed at social issues like AIDS, for instance, and in particular.
Yeah, without a doubt. And not to make light of it, I was also just thinking about, the Africans who love Trump or loved Trump. How did they not perceive that, he would eventually land on them? I mean, just given the texture, of his policies, of his speeches, his rhetoric, the people that he hires, what made Africans feel like we wouldn't be affected?
I think if you just look at making America great again on the face value, you would imagine that part of that greatness would include its status in the world and its influence in the world. But as you quite correctly point out, if you listen to the rhetoric and you listened a little bit closer, looked a bit deeper, you would have seen that Trump is looking inward more and more. Yeah.
And that takes us to our next point, because it seems like, obviously he's scaling back his aid footprint globally, but there are other global superpowers at play. There's a big race, whether we're talking about medicine, whether we're talking about AI, the other global superpowers are always keeping an eye on this kind of situation. Do you think that he's creating a void that they are likely to fill? I mean, for example, China restated its commitment to WHO in the same week that Donald Trump was pulling back. Is he sure he's not shooting himself in the foot? I mean, I'm just saying, like, a huge part of what makes America's image work globally is that America's everywhere. In one way or the other, you see them in the corners, and whether you see them or not, CIA, they are there in some shape or form. So do you think he's thought that through?
I won't go into what he might have thought, but I will say that this is about soft power, especially if we're looking at the funding for development aid. And soft power, we've got to look at it in two dimensions. There's the perception of soft power, and I think that America, from an African point of view, they've had a perception of significant soft power coming from 70s, 80s, all the way into 2000s, 2010. And even in Namibia, the perception is still there that they have a huge influence on our society in terms of soft power. But when this news broke, I did some following up. I contacted the Office of the Prime Minister, who referred me to the National Planning Commission, just to get
Prime Minister of Namibia.
Yes.
Let's say for African audience over there, Prime Minister of Namibia. Yes.
To give a bit of context for our local audience.
Yes.
And the National Planning Commission, I spoke to a director who's coordinating foreign donations and funds coming into Namibia, and he said that actually America's not been spending much here, so that goes to show the other side of soft power, which is not about perception, but about what you are actually funding, promoting, controlling within a foreign country. We thought that America is so crucial to our health sector in particular.
Yes, absolutely.
But based on this information that was shared with me, it seems that they have already been doing less in terms of the actual money that they are spending here for those programs for some time before this current situation.
Yes.
And even if you've heard from our health minister, he's been saying that we need to calm down and relax.
Yeah.
We are not as dependent on their help as the perception was, and that's why I wanted to make the distinction between what we think they are doing for us and what they are actually doing for us.
So essentially, they had won the subconscious battle. You know, this just in the background, America's there doing something.
Yes. But in actual monetary terms, it wasn't as substantial as what we expected.
All right.
Which is why our officials are saying that our programs will continue, and surely we will miss the help, but it's not something that we cannot replace. Coming to your question now, I think that primarily it creates an opportunity for our own governments to take ownership of what we are doing for ourselves and to establish that idea of self-reliance within our communities, for our people to see that it's actually our own money, our own initiatives. We are doing these things for ourselves. We don't rely on others. But having said that, I think that we must be cognizant of Namibia's growing position globally, and especially within the African context.
All right.
We are famously said by our late president, whose death we will remember specifically
2 days from the airing of this show, actually,
yes,
Dr. Hagaji Gengo.
But he always said that we are an enemy to none and a friend to everyone. And geopolitically, we are very important. We punch above our weight.
Okay.
In terms of how the superpowers of the world are competing with each other and the influence that they want to have over Africa, because our fellow African governments listen to what we have to say, even though we've got a tiny population, we're in a corner down here in the south, we don't have significant economic or military might, but still the voice of reason is what they are looking for. I mean, the fellow African countries.
Yes, of course.
So in terms of that, China has definitely been competing with America and Europe. I think those three forces, their competition focuses to some extent in Namibia.
Yes.
And with America putting in place this pause and following it up most likely with some kind of a reduction, that will definitely create a space. And there will be competition to fill that space. And I think the main competitors will be Europe and China, because both of them are very interested in our minerals, our resources, but also in our voice in the African Union and on the African stage, backing whichever side. And we have ties both with Europe and with China.
So basically what happened here is that America thought that it was just us, that we were their only option in the relationship. Meanwhile, China was in our DMs telling us we're pretty, telling us our uranium is nice, they like the coast. You know, European Union was like, hey, listen, we should talk about that green hydrogen, see how we can link up. And America was taking us for granted, and we were like, no, you know what? You go ahead and do what you're going to do. I might explore these options. And it might really pan out in such a manner. It's certainly trending in that direction. But something you mentioned there was the voice of reason. And I'm going to use that to link into our next subject, because the voice of reason is currently needed in this here Africa, because Rwanda and South Africa have taken the gloves off our ghetto. I've never seen it like that, quite frankly. When I first saw the messaging from the South African DF, after they had lost personnel in the DR Congo, they essentially said killing our soldiers is a declaration of war. And they were saying that to someone who seemingly does not mind any form of war declaration, who is the president of Rwanda, Kagame. So by the time we're as we're having this show, we know that the SADC Troika met on Friday. We're going to fully get into what they discussed as we enter the week in Zimbabwe, which was an interesting thing, but I was happy.
Yeah.
I was happy. Why? Because during the SADC summit, villas were built and roads were built.
Yeah.
And here we were thinking they'd only be useful for 1 week. Turns out they're still useful. So, I mean, look, we're looking at this situation right now. Is this standoff a proxy conflict, potentially a proxy conflict fueled by external powers?
That's a deep question. Firstly, we are not at a conflict yet.
No, we're not.
We are at posturing. We have seen
So it's
and
pumping
heard.
chest.
Yeah.
But thumping chest, so to speak, you know what I mean?
We've seen things being said. I think that a very useful opportunity to gain real insight into the heart of the matter was presented by former President of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki.
Yes.
He was recently live on the internet, a whole speech he gave, and he brought it back to the heart of the conflict, which is fueling all of this. And that conflict is actually about tribalism. That's at the heart of it. And I think that is a very pertinent issue across Africa. And I think that in Namibia, we do have a voice of reason to share with our fellow African brothers and sisters, because we've maintained peace in Namibia despite having 13 distinct tribes. We've got various sub-tribes. There's a huge variety of different kinds of people
100%.
in Namibia. And even though we do have a specific group which is a majority, life is not unlivable for any minority in Namibia. Even if we go to the extremes and we look at LGBTQ populations in Namibia, there's a struggle about laws and things that apply, but the day-to-day life, it's not a problem. Whereas in the DRC, the minority population, which is in the eastern Congo, which was split from a population of, which is in Rwanda by the colonial European divisions of Africa, those mandatory or arbitrary divisions made in the last century. That population in Congo suffered, and life was not bearable to the extent that they formed armed militia and veritable armies of their own to protect their indigenous populations, while at the same time everybody maintains that they are Congolese. If they are Congolese who cannot live a decent life in Congo, it's a problem.
It's an issue.
Yes, and that issue spills over. And that's at the heart of this current standoff.
Yes.
Now, if we, in terms of thought exercise, imagine that things escalate and it comes to military conflict between South Africa and Rwanda. That will be a disaster.
It will be a disaster because it wouldn't happen in either of their countries.
Exactly.
And I think that's particularly what I would be thinking about immediately. And of course, there's the militaries have got different strengths, just from any basic research. Of course, the Rwandans are on the ground. They're on the ground forces, have got a lot of practice. South Africa manufactures its own military helicopters. Its air force is very advanced. But in Africa, we don't need this.
Yeah.
We don't need this. And so, is the AU useful right now?
I think, first of all, the AU gives us a point to aim for. They've already put down in black and white the guidelines for the Africa we want, Agenda 2063.
Yes.
So at least we know as a continent where we're trying to go.
Yes.
And that puts in stark relief the dangers that this kind of conflict poses, because it's not just about two countries, it's about the entire continent.
Yes.
And its impact on all of our ambitions
Yes.
will be severe. We are striving for free movement of Africans, free trade of Africans. We've got a Africa-wide trade agreement,
Yes,
which we are
absolutely.
trying to implement.
Yes.
And there are practical impediments to that, but it will be completely destroyed.
100%. I mean, just last week, we managed to get $8 billion in pledges for the Africa 300 project, where we're trying to electrify 300 million homes. So this was in Tanzania. And, you know, this is just next door as well, you know. So, like, on one end, we are trying to make progress.
But we can kiss that dream goodbye.
If
And
any of
so
this
many
escalates.
of our common African dreams, we can kiss goodbye.
Yeah.
If this situation is allowed to escalate in that direction.
It's supposed to be all hands on deck right now.
Yes. And you know, it's not just about SADC, although SADC is the immediate group
Yes.
that needs to intervene. But East Africa, West Africa, in fact, the entire continent has a stake
Yes.
in maintaining peace and not allowing this to escalate. And I hope that SADC and in Zimbabwe, the focus will be put back on the situation in Congo,
DRC.
in the DRC.
The grassroots, the situation on the ground, what
Yes.
you're dealing with, and because this is just a result of that. And if you don't deal with that,
We need to address that.
Yes.
And look, if that population in Eastern Congo needs to be separated,
yes,
then we must look at the modalities, the practicalities. Can it happen?
can it happen?
And how can it happen?
Yes.
And if, on the other hand, that population needs to be integrated into the larger Congo
Populace.
population,
Yes.
we need to look at those practicalities.
100%.
Can it happen? How can it happen? And then we need to support whatever decision we make. But it's a difficult decision,
Yes.
and that decision needs to be made now.
Yes, thank you, Algeto,
You're welcome.
for coming through and sharing your thoughts, sharing your expertise and knowledge. So, President Paul Kagame, I don't know if you visited DSTV 285 and GOTV 25 and President Cyril Ramaphosa as well. All I'd like to say on behalf of Algeto, Greg and myself is, if you're considering conflict, perhaps what you need right now is a second take. So that's been our show. Thank you for joining Second Take as we take a second look on everything that is transpiring, particularly in Africa. Do make sure you follow us on TikTok. Remember, I'm the guy that has the conversations you don't want to have with your family. All you have to do is switch on the TV and, just don't make eye contact. My name is Ashwyn Mberi. See you next week for Second Take.